What we need to do is look at what we are spending now and create savings by deciding what is important and what we ought to be doing, and what are those things that we might like to do but we just don't have the money to, and eliminate those programs or reduce the spending in many of those programs, which is what the Appropriations Committee does every day. When these bills come down here, we have had hearings on the different functions of the federal government, and believe me, if you or I were to sit down and discuss what the federal government ought to be doing, we would agree on a lot. There would be things we would disagree on that I think are essential, and things that I would disagree that you would think were essential. We have 435 members, represent all corners of this country. And a budget is, by its very nature, a compromise in those different opinions on what ought to be funded and what the proper role of government is. One thing we do know, that we are $17 trillion in debt, and that a portion of the solution is reducing our discretionary spending. We have been doing that for the last 4 years, and it has been hard work by the Appropriations Committee. We also know that you cannot get this budget to balance, no matter how hard you try, by reducing discretionary spending. It's not large enough in the overall context of things to cut it enough to get the budget to balance. You've got to do other things. You've got to have tax reform. You've got to have entitlement reform. We have to look at every area that the government is spending. And right now, I think it is that about 28% of the total expenditures of the federal government are discretionary spending. About 72% of them are mandatory. They're on autopilot. They just go on unless we change the underlying law. So we've got to have the courage to address a lot of the things that is driving our debt. And I will tell you, you will never balance this budget until you get the economy growing again. That's the reality. When you looked at the late 1990s, when President Clinton and a Republican Congress balanced the budget, or at least that's who was in charge at the time. We can argue about who balanced it. But at that period of time, it wasn't because Republicans were so conservative that they came in and reduced spending and the budget all of a sudden got balanced. Or it wasn't that President Clinton came in and just raised taxes and everything and all of a sudden we had a ton more revenue. What it was is that the economy grew. And I mean, it boomed. We had the dot-com bubble, if you remember, where we had more money coming into the federal government than we know what to do with. In fact, when we talked about paying off the national debt at the time, I actually heard debates from leading economists that said we could pay off the national debt too fast. We had that much money coming in because the debts wouldn't come due when all the money was coming in. But then, of course, that turned around when the dot-com bubble bust, and since that, then 9/11 happened and a whole bunch of other things, and 2 wars, and et cetera, et cetera, and et cetera. The reality is you can't balance this budget simply by reducing discretionary spending. But I will tell you that the Appropriations Committee has been doing their job. They've been looking at the proper role of federal government, what our responsibilities are, what we must fund, and what we should fund, and also at what we would like to do and sometimes just don't have the money to do. So those are the difficult decisions we've been making.